Earth mysteries. Why did the ancients build sacred sites around our planet? The circles, the pyramids, the henge monuments, the standing stones. Why did they make massive use of crystals? Why did they construct layers? Why develop geomancy and use the same sacred geometry all over the world? These are the subjects we will define and explore in this program. This is the rollright stone circle in the countryside northwest of Oxford. The rollright stones are comprised of this circle here, a ruined dolmen structure in the field beyond the circle, as though the stones look as though they're leaning together, whispering together, and they're called the Whispering Knights. So the rollright stones, the whole complex of the site, represents one of the great legendary motifs associated with the prehistoric standing stones, and that is that they were once people that have been turned to stone for one reason or another. Another legend associated with this site is that the stones in the circle can't be counted. In fact, there have been 4 official surveys of this stone circle, and each survey has a different number of stones marked on it. This is probably because stones break off and other people bring stones from surrounding fields and put them into the circle. So there are many legends associated with this group of stones here. But the site has one particular modern claim to fame, and that is that it is the main field base of the Dragon Project.
Dragon Project, which I called after the energy of the dragon in traditional cultures like China or Wales. The dragon was always symbolic of the energy of the earth. It was always symbolic of veins of qi again, or veins of qi, which ran through the earth. In China, they actually called them dragon currents or dragon lines. Now, this idea of dragon energy, a bunch of us got together, scientists, chemists, physicists, psychologists, archaeologists, instrument makers, and people involved in ley hunting. Ley hunting, I should say, is based on the idea of ley lines, which is the straight alignment that you can draw between ancient sites, dead straight alignments that you can accurately plot on a very detailed ordnance survey map. And these straight lines usually run 3, 4, up to, say, 10 miles long. And they may be indications for navigation through the ancient landscape, as well as conduits of the earth energy itself, this dragon energy. Anyhow, the Dragon Project's primary task was to look and to see what are the geophysical variables of energy at a sacred site. What are the invisible influences of the Earth's magnetic field, of ultrasonic activity, that is very, very high-pitched sound, almost like a dog whistle. We find this sound is actually emitted when the sun comes up in the morning and hits the stones. A very complex reaction takes place in the stones, in the geological lattice structure of the stones, and emits this ultrasonic sound. We also are looking at the aspects of ambient radioactivity at these sites. How does this radioactivity influence consciousness?
The Dragon Project began in 1978, and it was set up to study the rumor that existed that sites such as Rollright and other megalithic sites in various parts of the world had curious powers or energies occurring at them. Various legends say that the stones have fairies and elementals living at them, that there are various curious enchantment properties. People can go into a stone circle and go into what we would call a time-space warp, but what the folklore traditions call enchantment. Also, various people have had curious anecdotal experiences at megalithic sites. They've touched stones and felt a shock coming off them. They've had curious psychic experiences. Throughout the 20th century, psychics have reported seeing strange beings, strange aura or field effects around stones, and these have been written down in many books and many journals over the years. Then in 1975, two scientists carried out work at a standing stone in Wales, and they used a magnetometer, and they found that the geomagnetism within the stone they were investigating did vary in an anomalous way. So there were various sources, from the scientific to the traditional and the folkloric, which said that these stones have curious powers. So in 1978 it was decided to put together a project to try and get a coherent look at this rumour. And it was decided that the project should proceed in two modes. One, looking at the stones using physical monitoring of various types, magnetism, radiation and so on. And the other was to use psychic work using dowsers, psychometrists and other sensitives, and to see if there was at any point during the research where perhaps these two modes could match up. We're a long way from achieving that yet, but we can see here at Rollright some of the examples of work that are going on long term at various stone circle sites. But this place is the key field base of the whole effort.
Well, it is very, very remarkable and notable how people who take up this sort of study and investigate ancient places or even visit ancient places do kind of develop a spontaneous different view of things in general, more in accordance with traditional or ancient view of things, as if these places do have a sort of message or something left in them which subtly alters the mind. But maybe not just even particular places, maybe the whole earth is like this. I think if you were to take a voyage and be on your own, or be alone in some landscape, you begin to realize that human nature and such is actually an eternal thing. And these things have been experienced by people of all times. Because our relationships are defined. I mean, you hear the birds singing, the smell of the flowers, the smell of the country. It's all eternal. It's not, and the fact it's delightful does seem to show that we are made for this earth. You see, it's a sort of tailor-made thing for us, or rather, we're made together.
One of the people that's been working for a long while with the Dragon Project is electronics consultant Rodney Hale. Hello, Rodney.
Hello there.
Could you tell me what experiment you're carrying out here at the stone?
Yes, this is one designed to measure changes in the Earth's magnetic field as opposed to the static fields that the other magnetometers that we normally use will measure. It has 2.5 miles of wire in it and generates a small voltage if the Earth's magnetic field varies, and this is amplified and measured on a very sensitive meter that I have here. So we've got a very sensitive indication of changes in the magnetic field as opposed to the steady state readings that the ordinary magnetometers that you've been using for the other work. So it presents an interesting backup looking for variations in the magnetic field.
A sort of dynamic field.
A dynamic field, yes.
Yeah. What's happening here is that the tallest stone in the Rollright circle is having its magnetic field monitored. The probe is inserted into one of the natural hollows in the stone, and there is a magnetically sensitive transducer at the end of this probe here, seated well within the stone. A cable runs out to a monitoring device here, and a record is kept of the changes in the digital reading here, and this may go on for 20 minutes or half an hour per stone. These readings are taken all over the circle, different days, different weeks, different months. Those readings are then put through a computer which converts the readings to Gauss, which is the unit of measurement for the magnetic field. And what we're looking for are anomalous or unusual changes in the field of the stone. And here at Rollright, we have on occasion monitored some very sudden, very severe, quite remarkable shifts in the magnetic status of some of the stones. While this experiment's going over here on the north side of the circle, simultaneous magnetic readings are going on over on the southern perimeter of the circle, and we are interested always to compare how two stones monitored at the same time within the circle compare one to another, to see if there's a general change in magnetism or an individual change. A lot of the time there's nothing unusual to report. We're looking for those rare occasions when something odd does happen. Because of all this work that's been going on over the years, we're now very sensitive to changes in natural radiation at megalithic sites. Some occasions, the radiation readings within the stone circle can double or treble, perhaps for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, and then subside and carry on as normal. Near the north side of the circle, we have a high radiation zone that always gives higher readings than anywhere else in the circle. We don't know what causes this. Some stone circle sites we find have lower radiation readings than their surrounding environment. Sometimes they're higher, sometimes they are quite normal.
Just as human beings have character, places have character. There's natural character to the landscape. People go to a certain place and feel bad or good at it. They feel uplifted, they feel depressed. And the character is brought upon by their personal interaction with the site and whatever things are happening in the site, such as the topography, the light, magnetic fields, electrostatic fields, the person's own state of health and so on. And geomancy is to do with determining the qualities of different sites and acting accordingly. You wouldn't place a house in geomantic tradition upon a site which is going to make people ill. You wouldn't either place it upon a site which had sacred energies, because you would be driven mad by hallucinations or by apparitions or by just being so charged up that you couldn't sleep, or you would become ill in some way. And so sacred sites have got this sort of character.
Now here we've got one of the longest running experiments of the Dragon project, the use of an ultrasonic detector. Ultrasound is sound beyond the range of normal human hearing, sort of sound that animals like dogs can pick up, and of course the sort of things that bats use to navigate by. And in fact, Charlotte, if I could just hold this a minute, this particular instrument is a bat detector that zoologists and ecologists would use when studying the behaviour of bat colonies. It's a wide range of ultrasound that it picks up, and we can adjust to the frequency of the sound. It usually is strongest during the February-March time of the year. It hardly ever occurs during midsummer period, and it is intermittent during the autumnal and midwinter period. Now Rodney is dowsing back across the whole circle, and his rods are indicating the flow of energy in the concentric rings found within the circle. It's interesting to know that what Rodney has just found here with his dowsing rods was confirmed a couple of years ago, in 1983, by Charles Brooker, an independent researcher who was using a magnetometer. He spent 2 days making a magnetic survey of the interior of the Rollright circle, and he found, in fact, that there was a spiral pattern of magnetic variation within the ring of stones. And what Rodney has found was found by this man using modern instrumentation. And it is interesting to know that modern science has now confirmed what dowsers have been finding out here for several years now. This is the village of Cairnewny. It dates from the first millennium BC, let's say 700 BC. Many habitations and dwellings, but Although it dates from the first millennium BC, its origins are probably much, much older than that. This ancient village of Carnuni harbours a very special secret. It's this strange subterranean stone chamber. It's called, in Cornwall, a fogu. Nobody knows its purpose. Archaeologists originally thought that maybe it was a storage place for grain, but this could never be supported by excavational research. And now it's generally agreed that it's some sort of ritual centre at the heart of the village. And when archaeologists use terms like ritual, it means esoteric, secret, part of the spiritual life of these early peoples. It means they don't know what the real function of this place was all about. As we explore it, though, we can see certain similarities with other structures we do know something about, such as the Pueblo Indian kiva type of structures in the American Southwest, and also a little bit like the stone chambers of the New England area in North America. If we follow this passage around, we come into an open chamber very much like a kiva. One end of the Carnuni fogu is this circular stone chamber, and one feels it was probably the initiatory centre of this ancient community. Once upon a time, of course, it would have had a roof, probably a wattle and turf roof, a distinct advantage on a day like this. We don't know exactly what went on here, but we can be sure this is the spiritual heart of this place, with the ancient and mysterious rites and rituals and understandings of these ancient people.
The ancient builders seem to have been just as interested in the properties of crystals as we are today. There is considerable growing evidence that the ancient builders may have had some special knowledge of the, to us, still mysterious interrelationship between quartz crystals, earth magnetism, and the human body and mind.
One of the more remarkable and dramatic features of this stone circle is this huge quartz block. The rest of the stones at Boscornun are sarsen stones, but this huge crystal stands out all on its own. It's heavily covered with lichen, which greys it down, but in fact it is one beautiful crystalline block. As one looks closely at it, one can see the glistening crystals all over the stone. And this is very typical of all the prehistoric sites. Either the stones have a high crystalline content, or quartz or some other crystal such as feldspar is included in the site complex. And there does seem to have been this obsession with the prehistoric stone circle builders with the use and the application of crystal. And this is one of the key features that Earth Mysteries researchers are trying to understand, and we suspect that the connection may be to do with consciousness.
Crystals often occur in conjunction with sacred sites, and there are probably a number of reasons for this. First of all, from my own studies in memory, crystals store memory and they amplify memory. This is why traditionally gypsies look in crystal balls. They are consciousness amplifiers. They tend to augment any psychic function which is occurring. Literally, the word to amplify means to make more of, and this is exactly what the crystals do. If you go into a meditative state, they will increase that meditative state. If you go into a healing state, they will increase that healing state. They are augmenters of psychic energy. On a biological level, crystals have a structure, a kind of lattice structure, which is more similar to human cellular structure than any other material on the face of Gaia. So there is an analog, a resonance already between crystals and the human cell. Jacques Monod, a famous French biochemist, pointed this out, or molecular biologist rather. Another aspect of crystals, they were in their memory capacity storage use. For example, in Australia, the medicine men, what they called the clever men, the shamans, what they would do is when they were to initiate a young shaman, they would always take a crystal and make an incision in a part of his abdomen and actually put the crystal in the body and then sew it up with a thorn in some type of fiber. And the idea would be that the shamanic experience was encoded in this crystal. And then when that shaman died and his body decayed, that crystal was taken out and put into the next shaman's body so that there was a transmission of this memory, this wisdom, actually in the face of a crystal. We use crystal in our quartz watches, Silicon Valley, the idea of the whole kind of computer technology, all based on a kind of crystalline structure. Much of the body could be seen exactly as Marcel Vogel talks about, an IBM researcher, as liquid crystal. So we have a lot of consciousness analogs to crystal. And finally, the idea of crystal mythologically was supposed to be kind of the frozen water of heavens. So it had a kind of divine nature to it as well. So we have a number of ways in which we can relate it to sacred sites. We often find quartz crystals in the stones of stone circles or standing stones. We often find crystal balls located at sacred sites and kind of mystical tales of ancient sites and things like that. So there's a whole tradition that has to do with crystal.
The initial studies of Newgrange by serious archaeologists, when it was found that there was a special aperture created at the entrance that allowed a beam of light to come back into the chamber. This was fantastic because there was no doubt here that the ancients were aligning their monument to the rising sun at winter solstice. They had covered the mound with quartz, practically completely with quartz. They must have brought this quartz up from, the nearest place would be 40 miles south in the Wicklow Mountains. And how they got tons and tons of quartz shifted up there still remains fantastic. This was a fantastic effort to get these pieces of quartz up to Newgrange and to assemble this gigantic ritual mound in this way.
This circle is called Dulo. It's in southern Cornwall. Very small in ground plan, but with, as you can see, large stones. The unique characteristic of this circle is that all the stones are pure rock crystal, or white quartz. Some of them look grey because of lichen growth, but they're all white quartz. This is a most dramatic example that we've already mentioned of the use of crystal at these sort of prehistoric sites. Always crystal seems to be involved in some way. Here it is absolutely unambiguously used. And the question is, why did early peoples put so much store in the use of crystals at their sacred sites? Now, there is experimentation going on in various parts of the world into the energy characteristics, the special properties that crystals may have. The question arises why these ancient peoples felt that crystal was so important to put into their ancient sites. Now, there is quite a lot of research going on in various parts of the world, particularly in America and Britain, into the energy characteristics of crystals. And in this country, in Britain, a lot of the work is being pioneered by biologist Harry Oldfield.
Here we have a quartz crystal
which is composed of silicon oxide. And the thing is, with the element silicon, it has a sister element, carbon. Now, carbon is an element on which all life on this planet is based. And the reason why I think we get so much reaction between ourselves and stone sites and quartz crystals is because these two elements have an electrical valency which is identical. It's a valency of 4. And it's the only two elements in the periodic table that can do this. But here, in the form of carbon, you've got an element of life which is diverse in many forms. But in silicon, you've got a close symmetrical structure, stability, and non-diversity of form. But because in there the electrical balance is so delicate, it's a knife-edge balance, I can, by bringing my hand close to the quartz crystal, produce some interesting effects. Now, as you can see, Paul, the current changed. But it does take, I'm glad it, do you see that?
It seems to retain something.
It retains something, and this is the property of quartz. Now here we have a very special electromagnetic generator on which on top of is a quartz crystal. This is running on a 12-volt power supply, so everything is very portable for field operation, for experimental purposes. We also have here sockets to monitor radiations on oscilloscopes and pen chart recorders. But when I've already tuned, I hope, this crystal in to its harmonic resonance, and when I switch it on, you will actually hear an audible sound coming from the crystal. And just to prove that's coming from the crystal, let's hear here, no audible sound. Crystal back on the field, and we have the sound.
So, does this instrument excite the crystal?
It does indeed. And the molecules vibrate enough to produce sound waves. And I believe this is what happened to us when the sun rose on that megalithic morning.
The energy input into the standing stone excited the molecular lattice of the stone on which we were
particularly the quartz.
Now, what do we have here?
Well, Paul, here we have a mime mirror.
That's the EEG device.
Indeed, hooked up to a crystal.
Well, that's strange because we've been using it on site, of course, hooked up to dowsers to observe their brain rhythms. Surely this machine is designed to work with human beings.
Indeed, but remember, it's a very sensitive piece of apparatus and it will pick up minute changes in electrical forces, not only from inside a person's skull, but from within that crystal as well.
So what have you been finding?
Well, we've been finding that when we have done experiments projecting thoughts and or energy fields from bodies into crystals, we are getting some very interesting reactions, even, shall I say, from a distance with this device.
How far away?
So far, about 15 feet.
Really? Suppose that.
Did you see that some lights change?
There's activity.
There was activity. Now, if I bring my hand close, or rather, Paul, you bring your hand close to the crystal, closer. There's also activity.
What's this? There are lights going on and off here.
Yeah, these are artifact lights that happen to go on when there is sudden surges of electrical activity, which are perhaps the amplifier goes into a clipping mode.
They are used when we're using human subjects for muscular.
Indeed. Now, this is exactly, you can see there's nothing touching the leads, there's no artifacts that's being produced, but this is exactly, as you can see, when my hand gets near.
But crystals don't have muscles, Harry.
No, they don't, but they do have electrical forces inside. And these electrical forces can change polarity, they can change their rhythms through the crystals, their movement for the crystals.
So, is what we're seeing, is the crystal picking up brain rhythms and energy fields.
Most definitely. I
And
believe
just
this to
playing
be...
them back through the machine.
Although, Paul, I must emphasise that we've only been able to use this apparatus on a couple of occasions.
Yes.
And there's still a lot more work to be done
course.
before I personally am going to draw any concrete conclusions.
But we are seeing behaviour that we normally associate with brain behaviour
Absolutely.
coming from a crystal.
This is what I believe.
This is very interesting. Well, I know you've got this and a lot more experiments at early stages at this time. There's clearly a lot more work to be done, and I'm only waiting for the day when we can start to apply some of this technology at the great crystal stones. Now, this suggests that somehow or other the nature of crystals is that they can enhance or absorb the effects of human consciousness, that they are consciousness receptive. Now, if this is so, and if we can go on further to really confirm these early experimental results, then we may have here, locked up in these sort of megaliths, some form of consciousness communication, perhaps from a remote period. Maybe it's some other form of consciousness altogether. But one of the priorities of Earth Mysteries research at the moment is to really try to understand what the secret is in these crystal megaliths. This stone is Menantol, the Hold Stone, and it's in the Land's End district of Cornwall. It has two great legends associated with it, two traditions. One was that local village people would come to the stone and consult it as an oracle. And the way that divination worked was that the wise person from the village would come to the stone with two needles and place them crossed on the top of Menantol. Then the person seeking the advice of the stone, of the oracle, would ask the stone the question. And the tradition was that the needles would acquire a peculiar rotating motion. And it was the skill of the seer, of the wise person, to interpret those movements of the needle and give an answer to the supplicant. The other great tradition associated with this Hold Stone is that it had great healing properties. And this is a tradition associated with a number of megalithic sites. And people researching into Earth Mysteries feel there may be some truth in this old tradition, this old legend. The other great tradition associated with this stone is that it has healing properties. And this is a legendary motif associated with many megalithic sites. And Earth Mysteries researchers feel there may be a grain of truth in this legend. In the case of Menantol, what would happen would be that the sick person, usually a child, would be passed through the hole of the stone 3 times. And in some versions of the tradition, the ill person, the child, would then be dragged on the ground around the stone. Some people say 3 times, some 6, some 9, but the magical numbers. A particular disease that this was said to cure was rickets, a sort of bone disorder. It was very common in the Middle Ages. Now, these two traditions may have a common factual derivation. We know today in modern medicine that healing, particularly of bone disorders, can be accomplished by the use of small levels, pulses of electromagnetism. It does help the healing of bones. The nature of what was carried out here as a healing process, plus the divinatory use of moving needles, possibly hints that there is some unusual or special magnetic quality about this stone. So maybe there are low levels of electromagnetic fields around the megaliths at some time. And indeed, from research done on the Dragon Project and other research programs, we do know and we have measured that stones like Menantol can, on occasion, give sudden shifts and changes of geomagnetism. So maybe there is some truth in this healing legend associated with this ages-old stone.
Lays or ley lines are straight alignments of holy, sacred or special places laid out in remote antiquity in many places around the world.
Lays, in their simplest definition, are alignments of sacred sites across country. And we find the earliest versions of these with the old stones, the megalith sites of northwest Europe. But we find similar sort of arrangements in South America and the Andes, such as Bolivia and Peru, where we have ancient tracks on the ground linking old Indian shrine sites. The word lay was coined by Alfred Watkins of Hereford, because he was the first to clearly articulate the observation that ancient sites fell into straight alignments. But he was in fact only part of a whole understanding of the ancient landscape being laid out in this way, wasn't it, Nigel?
Yes, yes. There are many people before Watkins who talked about alignments and had various theories for them. And of course there is the connection between alignments and solar and lunar phenomena, which may not be lays. For instance, a line which runs to the horizon from a stone circle or from a church, which may have one or two sites upon it, but may not be technically a lay. Also, there are other kinds of problems with lays in that people have suggested that they carry energy, or that they are spirit paths, or that they have other sorts of characteristics which Watkins himself did not put down as being lays.
He thought they were, in fact, old traders' routes, didn't he?
That's
Laid
right.
down about 2000 BC. And being a businessman himself, perhaps that was the natural interpretation he'd put on
Yes.
to these remnants of alignments. And in the British Isles, where he did all his work, he didn't expect to find the tracks still left on the ground. He found remnants of old straight tracks, and in fact, that's what he called lays also, old straight tracks. He suggested that really we were looking at the ruins of these alignments,
Yes.
and mainly discernible only by the positioning across the landscape of ancient sites. But it's not just the old stones and earthworks that align, is it? We're
No.
finding alignments of ancient churches, medieval, middle-aged churches.
And in Cambridge we have the Seven Church lay with the round church at the northernmost end of it. And the round church itself represents the centre of the world, or the cosmic axis. And the cosmic axis itself had the pole star at the top of it, just like the star on top of the Christmas tree nowadays represents that. And so worship towards the north was carried on even after Christianisation occurred. Although people had become Christians in religion, they still used the old relation to the landscape for their sacred sites, and so we get these alignments which reproduce the former tradition of layout.
This is the Castle Mound at Cambridge, and it is a perfect example of an evolved site. This place has been important for people for a period of time beyond memory. This mound is a Norman castle, almost 1,000 years old. Once upon a time, it would have had a wooden palisade at the top. But that mound stands on the site of a much earlier Roman settlement. The Roman settlement, in turn, was on top of, superseded, a late prehistoric site. So for thousands of years, this point has been considered important, particularly from an administrative point of view. This point is also at one end of another sacred line that passes across the city of Cambridge, and this line ends on the far side of Cambridge at the prehistoric earthworked hill known as Wandlebury. It crosses the Cambridge Seven Church lay at Holy Sepulchre Church, the round church.
I'm sitting on the wall of the round church, the Holy Sepulchre, which is the beginning of the Seven Church lay, and also rests upon the lay which runs from Castle Mound to Wandlebury. The lay runs to St Michael's, where it forms the east wall. Beyond that, it goes to Great St Mary's, then on to St Edward King and Martyr, St Benet's, St Botolph's, and finally through the site of the city gate to St Mary's the Less. This church is also upon the alignment which runs from the Castle Mound through St Clement's, through this church, then through 2 other college chapels and several other important geomantic sites to Wandlebury.
In the case of Glastonbury, there's another link. You see that the main axis, looking down from the church at the west end, down the axis of the Abbey, down that strange old trackway called Dodd Lane,
Yes.
you'll get to that church on the rock called Gower Hill, about 20 miles away, and that thing will point towards, doesn't it? It goes pretty well towards Stonehenge. The foundation, the legendary foundation of Glastonbury Abbey, and the first Christian foundation there, was meant to reproduce the image of a paradise. And it was designed for that purpose, to represent the idea of paradise above, transferred to earth. And I think that the myth of St. Joseph and the original Christian foundation there, going back to the very beginning of the Christian era, no doubt it was renewed at that time, but I think that it harks back to an even earlier myth, and even earlier times when that particular plot of earth was as sacred as it became later under Christianity. It seems to me that legend of Glastonbury's foundation is a Christianization of an even earlier myth, which recognised a natural sanctity of that place. You see, it's not a Christian convention or any other convention.
In the turn of the century, Sir Norman Lockyer, the father of archaeoastronomy, surveyed Cornwall, and when he surveyed this site, he found an outlying stone that indicated an astronomical position for, I think, May Day sunrise. In 1974, John Michell surveyed Land's End also, looking for extended alignments or ley lines, and he found that there were 4 more stones in a dead straight line beyond the one that Lockyer had seen. So this stone circle has a row of 5 standing stones radiating out from it. At least 2 of those stones, though, are now damaged or removed from the alignment since Michel discovered them. But it is a classic case of a ley line coming up to a stone circle.
Well, I was attracted to that area because it's almost an island. It's an isolated area at the very far western end of England, and it's geologically different from its surroundings. It's a high granite plateau. It's about 8 or 10 miles square, no bigger than that. And yet on this small area is an absolute profusion of ancient monuments, going back to 3,000–4,000 BC, who knows. And over that whole area, there's a wealth of stone circles, standing stones, dolmens, as well as the more natural shrines, the holy wells, and early relics of visionary Christianity, when the Celtic saints set up their hermitages in the wild places. Now, this country's always been attractive to hermits, pilgrims, holy men, saints of all sorts. And it's got layers over it of history, of sacred history from all periods. And as I was studying this area, it became apparent that there is a kind of order among the prehistoric monuments, that you have, say, stone circles from which radiate alignments of stone. Now, this is beyond the peradventure, and they're placed with extreme accuracy. Very often said you can just see the next stone in line from the previous one. So this whole area received a kind of pattern over it.
This stone is one of the 2 Piper stones, not very far from the Merry Maiden Circle, and an alignment taken out from the Merry Maiden Circle through this stone, this one of the 2 Pipers, can be extended on to a further stone that John Michel discovered a couple of years ago, 1984. And he discovered that stone, worked out its position, found it to be exactly on this alignment. So here we have another stone circle, Merry Maidens, with an alignment of standing stones radiating out from it.
But what have they meant in the past? I mean, every great church, cathedral, sacred place of all sorts, they've always been pilgrimage places. People have made journeys to them. At the end of their journey, they've seen some wonderful things, some relics, whether they are phony or not. They seem to work nonetheless. And people got cures, blessings, and a very good journey. In fact, it took the place which tourism has today. Yet there was probably more point in it, because at the end of it there was some virtue. And it's traditional that people go to certain places for a kind of regeneration as well as for the pleasure of the journey.
Yeah.
Whether certain places have certain powers in this way is a moot point, because we know that certain, say, holy wells, springs and so on, do have curative powers, the waters themselves. But there's more to it than that. I think the experience of going to the place and taking part in the journey is in itself, is an end in itself, is a therapeutic experience in itself.
Here we have a situation where these enigmatic dolmens may mean something. You can walk, let us say a dolmen is illuminated 2 weeks before winter solstice. That is the walking distance from that dolmen to a major meeting place, a major solar construct. So the dolmens that are around the countryside in Ireland and England and Britain represent places where the tribes could see when the sun is coming in. It represented their calendar. And then they could walk to Stonehenge, or walk to Newgrange, or walk to the Loch Rue Mountains. But it gave them a time. That was their computer. That was their timepiece. That showed them when the sun shone in there. That showed them they should start walking towards it.
People realise we're dealing with a sort of synthesis of energies at places, at sites, of many different factors coming together. And so we do get this idea that's quite popular today, that lays and ley lines are these corridors of energy and so on,
Yes.
which they may well be, but not quite in the sense of a power line in the way that I think people interpret it at the present time.
When they tend to see it as being immutable, that it's just running there, and no matter what you do to it, you can't alter it. And yet, of course, the very fact that something like a church is built upon it is specifically to alter the quality and the character of a site, to enhance the character that it had, and to make it possible for people to access that power. And so the geometry of the building and its location, its orientation, and the time it's founded, and everything to do with it will be an enhancement of the quality of that site.
So we see with the practice of geomancy, what we're seeing is a sort of interaction, if you like, of planetary fields and human biofields.
Yes.
And into that comes the correct direction, the timing, perhaps planetary positions, a whole range of variables that have to be balanced and matched at a particular site. The subtlety, the complexity of the geomantic act.
From earliest times, Glastonbury has held a unique place amongst the sacred sites of Britain. It's associated with Camelot, King Arthur and the Round Table, Avalon and the Crystal Isle. A place of visions, healings, mystical initiations, a gateway to the other world. Shortly after the crucifixion, it is said, Joseph of Arimathea, in a group of 12 holy men, came from Palestine and brought the Holy Grail to Glastonbury. Here he founded the world's first Christian church. This is the Chalice Well in Glastonbury. Legend knows it as the healing bath of Camelot. The actual source of the well is unknown, but it's supposed to flow down from the Mendip Hills north of here. The water of Chalice Well contains a heavy iron content, which accounts for its red colouring. The cover of the well is wrought iron. It was designed according to its ancient pattern and restored to the well by the architect Bligh Bond, who in 1908 was given the task of reconstructing Glastonbury Abbey. The symbol of the interlocking circles is called, in Christian terminology, Vesica Piscis, which means the vessel of the fish. The fish, ictus, was of course the original symbol of Christ, and also of the Piscean age, which saw the beginning of Christianity. But we find this very same symbol of the vesica in all sacred geometries. It forms the ground plans of prehistoric stone circles like Stonehenge. It's found in the geometry of the Great Pyramid, in Hindu temples, and many other ancient sites throughout the world. This is one of the fundamental figures of sacred geometry. The waters of the well are said to have life-enhancing quality, and people come here and take the water for healing. Like all holy wells, Chalice Well is a feminine place, a place of the earth's spirit. Here at Chalice Well, you can strongly feel its yin energy, that feminine element of the earth force.
What is geomancy? It's a word which is being used today and kind of bandied about in a number of different ways, but literally geo means earth and mancy means divination. Literally means divination of the earth. There are two different forms of geomancy. One is a kind of oracular geomancy, which is done by things like coffee grounds or leaves, throwing bones, getting signs about a condition on the earth, whether it's hunting grounds or if a place is healthy to live in. This can be done by an oracular method. This method of divination, all methods of divination, by the way, are methods which connect the unconscious mind to the conscious mind. And this is always done by a medium of like throwing bones or reading clouds, the flight of birds, things like that. But geomancy is to locate the places in landscape geomancy, which we are considering in detail in this particular presentation, has to do with the idea of placing your structures, your building structures, your temples, your homes, your seats of governments, your healing centers on places on the surface of the earth where what the Chinese call qi or qi, that is vital breath or energy, is upwelling from the earth through geological factors and water factors. And these places where the qi or qi would upwell are places that animals recognize. Animals will sleep on these areas. They will give birth on these areas. In the natural landscape, you'll find, for example, birds will sit on them. Gnats will circle around over these areas. Anthills will develop over these areas. But ancient man built his structures, his sacred sites, things like Stonehenge or Avebury, again, over these sites, so as to enhance and amplify whatever ritual or scientific measurements were being made at these places. Geomancy is a way of, shall we say, reading the Earth's body language. What is the Earth doing at this point? Is this point an energy sink or an energy source? You want to build over an energy source. That way you get the complete benefit of the Earth adding to whatever function you're going to carry out at that site. So geomancy has this kind of universal application. We find geomantic sites, sacred sites, throughout the world. We find, for example, megalithic structures, and by the way, megalithic literally means large stone structures. We find them not only in England, we find them in Spain, Portugal, Germany. We find evidence of them in Africa, in Morocco. We find evidence in areas like Kenya. We find evidence of megalithic sites in Polynesia. There are stories of some in Mexico, stories of some in Australia. We're dealing with a worldwide phenomena. Bronze Age, which is about 2500 BC to, say, maybe 1500 BC. We are finding a wide distribution of megalithic sites. In England, where I have done most of my work, we find some 900 stone circles scattered throughout the British Isles. And those are only the stone circles which are still extant today.
Behind me is King's College Chapel, which is one of the greatest geomantic buildings in Britain, if not in the world. It was originally founded in 1446 as the chapel of a college founded by King Henry VI, who was a very mystical king. He gave the dimensions of the building and the college to his master masons so that they would reproduce sacred geometry precisely in the building. And although the country underwent a very serious civil war and the king himself was murdered in prison, the dimensions of the building were continued right the way to its completion in 1515. The building itself is laid out on a system of geometry called ad triangulum, which involves the use of equilateral triangles, making the famous symbol called Solomon's seal. It underlies the entire structure of the building. The building itself also has certain measurements in it which have mystical meaning, and the whole thing is sited in a place which has some of the greatest geomantic power in Cambridge.
Sacred geometry is the idea that you take proportions of a human body. In the ancient days, it was usually the king was the standard of measure. You would take parts of his hand, or length from the tip of the fingers to the elbow, or the length of his stride. And these were in Egypt, for example, called like the royal cubit. And you would take these distances and then incorporate them into the structure you were building. For example, you would take a cubit, or in the megalithic system, a unit has been isolated called the megalithic yard. The megalithic yard is something that Professor Alexander Thom, professor of engineering at Oxford University, after 40 years of surveying ancient sites, found after lengthy analysis that there is this megalithic yard of 2.72 feet, plus or minus 0.003 inches. And he said those old boys must have been engineers, because it took an engineer to decode what they did, because that is engineering accuracy. This length of the megalithic yard is found in the diameter and circumference of over 500 circles that he has surveyed. The idea of sacred geometry is something that Professor Thom looked at in great detail. It's something that John Michel has looked at in great detail in his work as well.
Well, I think probably places like Glastonbury Tor, which is an absolute natural landmark,
Yes.
where centres, sacred centres in ancient life, around which people travelled and migrated, going back to days of before settlement, that there are certain places all over the country which the tribe who lived in that country would regard as their little paradise, their sacred place and so on, and they'd pursue their annual journey around it, and it would be the dwelling place of the gods and so on. So it became invested with particular sanctity.
Yes. Well, we can know this, don't we, because of the prehistoric trackways, the swamp roadways, causeways that were built there, what, 2,000, 3,000 BC, and with the stone earth goddess figurines found underneath one of them. So obviously the area is being treated as an area of sanctity for all human memory, for all practical purposes. Do you feel, and obviously I've read your work on this, John, of a certain relationship, if you like, between a geomantic relationship between the sacred area of Glastonbury and the sacred area of Stonehenge?
Certainly, yes, they've been sanctified, as it were, by the same tradition. That is, when you go into the geometry and numerical foundation of the Christian site at Glastonbury and the same of the temple at Stonehenge, you find, it's incredible, the same canon of number, the same tradition, the same code of knowledge at the foundation of both of them. And this is not actually, I can't demonstrate here and now, but this is not a matter of chancing like that. It's the same foundation has been put on both. And this foundation is of remarkable significance because what they meant to imply by this pattern on which they founded these temples was that here is our image of the universe. This is a symbol of completion. And together with the liturgy performed there, the round of ceremonies and rituals, this will attract what it represents. That is the entire forces of the universe placed in harmony.
The idea that you incorporate into your structure units of length of a body such that when you go into the structure you get a resonance of this unit, this sacred unit, to a human body when it walks into it, or if it prays there, if it worships there, if it goes into healing there. There is a resonance. Other measurements are earth commensurate. How far does the earth rotate in a second? Things like that. So there are earth measurements and body measurements both incorporated into structures. You find this in the Great Pyramid, for example, in great detail. All kinds of measurements are built into the structure rather than plastered on it, or rather than put on it in a superficial way. The sacred geometry integrally incorporates these units of measurement. So every one of these circles has a complex geometry.
The whole basis of ancient temples was by making them symbolically and in every way represent what they wanted to attract. And therefore the Temple of the Virgin, say, of the spirit in nature, in other words, you make a temple based on the number 7, which is called the Virgin number for certain numerical reasons. And a solar temple would be on the number 6, the number of the crystal and so on. But at Stonehenge and in the original foundation of Glastonbury, you have this peculiar figure which St. John describes in Revelation as the New Jerusalem, and which Plato delineated as his ideal, or what he called the best practicable city, Magnesia. Behind all these images of the perfect order is the same scientific code of number, harmony and proportion and so on, essentially numerical. And this artifact, this code of number, was the foundation model for both Stonehenge and Glastonbury. Now, of course, Stonehenge was, the present Stonehenge was built about 2000 BC, whereas Glastonbury is a Christian foundation, and St. John's New Jerusalem was the beginning of the Christian era, and Plato's ideal city was 500 BC. But throughout all this time, it seems to me there was running, as it were, a kind of Masonic secret or a traditional science, probably which came through the initiatory mystery religions and such of the ancient world, which was to do with this scientific code of cosmology based on number, which harmonized all the elements, harmonized and expressed together all the elements in nature. And therefore you will see very clearly the object of the ancient temple, Stonehenge, say, in Glastonbury, which was to, as I said, attract harmonious influences and make them active in society. In the case of Glastonbury, there's another link. You see that the main axis, looking down from the church at the west end, down the axis of the Abbey, down that strange old trackway called Dodd Lane,
yes.
you'll get to that church on the rock called Gower Hill, about 20 miles away, and that thing will point towards, doesn't it? It goes pretty well towards Stonehenge, as if there was a pilgrim path between the two. And then, of course, on going back to very archaic times, one finds a very odd feature of geography in England, that these shrines, together with others, seem to be placed on a very wide, very large circle. And some of the points in the circle are traditionally the scenes, the sites of what we call the perpetual choirs, where, like a liturgy, where teams or choirs of saints kept up a 24-hour chant, which harks back to very archaic times referred to by Plato, when order was kept not by law, but by music. And by putting out the correct chant of the time, which is an interpretation of the cycles in nature, they would keep people in tune. We still have this phrase, in tune with cosmic processes, without any need for compulsion. Of course, society was simpler in those days. But we have a relic here in this circle of perpetual choirs of very archaic times indeed. And behind modern Glastonbury, behind Stonehenge it is now, we see the antiquity of those sites going back unimaginably far.
Nigel, we've been discussing geomancy as being sacred geography, the magical layout of sites and structures within the landscape and their relationship to the landscape. But many of these ancient temple sites, whether they are stone circles or Hindu temples or Christian structures even, of the earlier variety, have within them inherent geometrical principles.
Yes.
And the sort of collective name I understand for this is sacred geometry.
That's right.
And this, and you can extend on this perhaps, but as I understand it, sacred geometry is not an invention, not a human invention, but a human perception of the underlying forces of creation, that nature operates to geometrical systems, and that, if you like, that geometry is the doorway through which form is created in the time-space continuum that we know of as the universe. Why do you think that they employed this type of sacred or canonical geometry in temple structures?
Well, in sacred geometry is an attempt to create something artificial which is natural. It's by applying the geometry, which is the underlying structure of the universe, to an artificial building, one can recreate something which would be formed naturally in that form. Just as geometric form occurs naturally in nature, all geomancy is an attempt to harmonise with nature, earth harmony, to bring human artefacts into harmony with the natural order. And sacred geometry brings a sacred building into harmony with the natural order. So if a temple is constructed according to the Solomon's seal, the interlocking triangles, it will at once be a manifestation of all of the magical and mystical and occult powers of this symbol, plus producing a harmonious design which relates each part of the building to this geometry, so that instead of one part having a structure which doesn't relate at all to another part, all of it will relate part to part, making a holistic structure, and also relating both to the landscape in the geomantic, the geolocational factor, and to the natural order of things in general.
So that we could see within this sort of microcosmic energy matrix, in a way, created by the geometrical layout and ground plans, we have the orientations into the landscape, and also we have the orientations to astronomical events that can be all woven together within this geometrical structure.
That's right. I mean, the real canonical temple, so to speak, will involve perfect harmony with the landscape, with the cycles of time, with any kind of forces that are involved with it, with human usage, with the materials that are used. All of them totally appropriate to harmonising this thing both with its location and in general to the universe.
So we could say in sort of simple terms that the temple site, whether it's the ring of stones or whether it's a more elaborate structure, is really using geometry to pull in consciousness, the landscape and the heavens above into one focus at that place.
That's right. It is a sort of instant, an instant encapsulation of the entire universe at that point, at that time.
It becomes the centre of the universe for that particular place and time and function. Now, Glastonbury Tor is a very powerful centre in itself, and around it all sorts of accretions of legend and ancient structures have developed. Could you give us your views on Glastonbury as a general phenomenon?
Oh, yes, there's many aspects, aren't there? I mean, when you first go there, I think the thing that strikes you is the peculiar quality of light. That very often it has always another worldly look. And the place can be quite
mystic quality.
Yes, the buildings can be quite mundane, but there's certain particular times of day, there's a certain lighting of that landscape which distinguishes it from other places. And that light seems to have, that atmosphere of the place seems to have attracted sensitive people, holy men and so on, from all times. That's why the Abbey in the Middle Ages had this fantastic collection of relics, because all these holy men and saints had died there and left them this valuable stuff which attracted pilgrims and thereby filled the inns of the town and so on. But then there's the other phenomenon of how this somewhat remote place has from the earliest times been known as a great sanctuary, and how it seems every strand, every layer of oral history and legend has settled upon this landscape. So you've got things, elements of prehistoric myths, down to King Arthur, down to modern UFO experiences and the odd things that still happen there. I think that those myths are very, very closely related to the idea of Glastonbury or that district as being a sacred landscape. And all the monuments, all the, say, natural landscape monuments, there's the hills, they all have both a legendary relationship to each other in different legends and a natural relationship to each other. So you can go up, say, one of these hills and you can see the others, you can see the relationship between them, and there's a kind of almost a spontaneous mythology in that landscape. And then you go into the details of it. It's got everything. There's holy wells, there's remarkable ancient trees, things which naturally develop their own folklore and significance. So it's a country which seems to generate spontaneously its own natural monuments and myths. If you see the Earth as, in the traditional way, as a living creature,
yes,
then that certainly will be the essential move towards actually preserving the life on this Earth.
yes.
Because unless we look at it, again, in the traditional way, which actually makes sense from every point of view, scientific, metaphysical, and so on, as an actual living creature and treated accordingly, then we won't have a living creature left. And certainly I think that at this time, that philosophy is spontaneously recurring, mainly in response to necessity.
Yes.
And maybe the Earth thinks through us. Maybe we are just beginning to realize again this fact that we're not a living creature, because it's necessary we do think so. Indeed, if we don't think so, if we don't develop that traditional point of view again, then there's no other answer. So I see it as being inevitable,
Yes.
whatever the cause of it.
Well, the modern concept of the human being is of a portable person who can go anywhere and do anything and be the same, whether we're riding in a car or in the underground or in space. There's no real change in us as people. Whereas, of course, we all experience being in different places and feeling good or bad or well or happy, elated, whatever. This has been taken through in our culture also to the experience of sacred places. Most people now experience sacred places in terms of spectacle. They go there with their cameras and just as a tourist, or look out the window of a bus and they think they've experienced Stonehenge.
Postcard come to life.
Yes, that's right. It's a spectacle. They're separated from it. And this is basically because they are not participating in the correct frame of mind either with the correct reverence or the correct, just the correct mental mindset to be in such a place. Ultimately, the portable person says, I am the same everywhere, therefore everywhere is the same. And that is the basic fallacy of it.
Of course, they're not the same everywhere. There are these mood changes.
Exactly.
They may not be attributable merely to internal processes, but to external effects also. But we have the problem, do we not, of people going to ancient sites, and if they're not going there as a spectator to try to experience a site, there's the problem of going there without the knowledge to train one's experiential faculties.
Right.
And there's also the risk of people imposing on that site what they think ought to be there.
Exactly,
Which is a
yes,
sort of Mickey Mouse 20th century idea of what the sacred places were about.
Yes.
Whereas really they're places of learning, aren't they, for us to draw information from.
Certainly.
In the language and in the terminology that will be applicable to our day.
Quite right.
We will not be Neolithic megalith builders again, nor will we be pagans in the old sense.
No.
We need to relearn, to remember, to put back together again the information, the knowledge and the experience of these ancient places.
Say we come to a place, a stone circle in the moorlands or the remote mountains of Wales or Scotland or any place in England. It's best to go to those in general that you have to walk a ways to get to, away from many busloads of tourists coming if you really want to get the essence of a sacred site. You want to enter these sacred sites as not so much as a tourist and not so much in the sense of a spectacle, but in the sense of actually participating in its original design, purpose and function.
The word geometry itself actually means measuring the earth, so geometry. So it is to do specifically, originally, with place, with laying out things.
This is well expressed, isn't it, in that drawing by William Blake to his poem Jerusalem, where he shows that figure with his dividers on the earth,
Yes.
measuring the earth literally, and in the background we have that Stonehenge-like structure with perhaps a little bit of Avebury added on, and on the right-hand side is a feminine figure with a crescent moon, and on the left-hand side we have the masculine figure carrying the sun.
Yes.
So we have the solar masculine and feminine lunar symbology being used there, which we can see at all sorts of levels, whether it's sort of right brain gestalt and intuition and left brain cognitive logic analysis and so on. So we see consciousness and space and time and everything indicated in that one little drawing
Yes.
of Blake's.
But of course, Blake was showing that these sites on the earth have these esoteric, if you like, elements in them. Namely that the cycles of the sun and moon relate directly to the geometry on the ground. And throughout the year, the sun rises and sets at different positions each day. At the equinoxes, when the day and night are the same length, the sun rises due east and sets due west, which makes an east-west line. Yeah. At midday, the sun is always due south, and at midnight, although you can't see it, it's due north. So the apparent positions of the sun fix the four cardinal directions. Then beyond that, we have the rising and setting of the sun at different times of year. So that in Britain, for instance, midsummer sunrise will be quite far north of east, and midwinter sunrise is quite far south of east. This in itself creates several points around the horizon which can be viewed from any site, which can be expressed in terms of marker stones or a geometry within a structure. Beyond that, of course, we then have certain days in the year which can be marked. And in traditional times, there were 8 festivals of the year. Now, the equinoxes and the solstices, namely, which are solar festivals, namely midsummer, the autumnal equinox, midwinter, and the spring equinox, are interspersed by 4 other festivals, the cross-quarter days. Now, these are known under different names. There are pre-Christian names for them and Christianized names for them. One of the best ones is Halloween, best known ones is Halloween, which is the old beginning of the Celtic year, Samhain, and many stones are placed so as to mark this sunrise. And that is the beginning of the winter half of the year, so that in agricultural times, people would view sunrise on this day as being when the winter half started.
And so the cycle starts all over again. This eightfold division of the year must be of immeasurable antiquity, mustn't it? I'm thinking particularly of the chambered mound called Cairn T in Ireland,
Yes.
on the Lochrew Hills, 30, 40 miles northish of Dublin. And there we have this ancient structure, and it's 3,000 BC. It's a very, very ancient structure, older than the Great Pyramid probably.
Yes.
And we have the equinox sun shining through the doorway, down the corridor towards the central chamber, and the interior of Cairn T is covered with all these carvings, all these rock art as people call them, the Neolithic hieroglyphs.
Yes.
And I remember the shock of learning from Martin Brennan, from his research.
We knew that the sun was coming into Newgrange, but this meant for us what was going on with the other mounds. The other mounds, too, could be aligned to solstices and equinoxes, important times of the year. So myself and Jack Roberts decided to study Cairn T at Lochrew, also in Meath, and probably older than Newgrange. What happened there at equinox? We had good weather one morning, and it was our first time witnessing a beam of light entering into a mound. We had a Land Rover, and we had our special dog. The dog was able to pick out dolmens and corns automatically. We were late when the sun rose that morning. It was March 17th when we discovered the beam of light came into Cairn T and illuminated the stone inscriptions and illuminated the sun symbols. It was a cold morning and we were a little bit late. Jack was supposed to do the photography, and I was doing the timing and the writing. We were going to document what we were going to see. We opened up the iron door, archaeologists put up there, and the beam of light was streaming down in a narrow chink of light that began to illuminate the whole interior cavern. And there we were, Jack and I, probably the first people to have seen this in thousands of years. We're in this chamber. And Jack had some coffee. And we had our cameras and everything set up. But being the first people in this mound in thousands of years and seeing what this mound was meant for was an extraordinary experience. So much so that Jack forgot about filming anything, and I forgot about writing about anything. I couldn't do anything. The narrow chink of light came in, and then the rectangle began to appear and shine over the inscriptions one by one. And we were seeing why those inscriptions were there and why this mound was there. And the light illuminated the whole place. Golden light. A fantastic golden light came into the whole place, and us being the first place in thousands of years, we felt that it would have just been not proper at all to photograph it or write down anything. We stood in awe to see this magnificent light show appear before us. And the light went across the whole mound, the whole interior of the place, illuminating it with gold. We stood in awe watching it for about 10 minutes, and then it suddenly disappeared into another rock inscription. And we had witnessed something. We had witnessed something from the ancestors. We had been up to the mountain and we saw the light. I felt personally, my whole body was full with energy after this. Practically healing energy. The archaeologists described the mounds as being burial places, exclusively burial places. we were seeing something else. We had discovered that all the mounds let in light. All the mounds are astronomically aligned. What did this mean for the inscriptions? Then we began to see things. It first happened at Corn T, equinox. The sunbeam came through at equinox and shone on a solar symbol. It could have been a wheel, it could have been a flower, but with the sun shining on it, we knew that was solar symbol. Nearby crescents were engraved. We count these crescents, 30 of them, meaning the month. The crescents were signs of the moon. So we began to see solar and lunar symbols. The mounds were aligned towards the sun and the moon, and the symbols within the mounds were solar and lunar symbols. And some of these were very, very important because they made calendars. One particular stone was called the calendar stone. It was remarkable because it showed the whole 29.5 days, the sun emerging, the moon emerging from the sun, and the sun depicted as a spiral. And the first day of the lunar month with a crescent, going on until the full moon, which was double circles, and then back into the sun again, and it showed the 27th, the 28th, and the 29th day of the moon inside that spiral. Now, we had determined from Newgrange that the spiral was a solar symbol. That was their solar symbol.
Well, I suppose any philosopher would know that any man-made thing comes to an end in the end. But what Plato was looking for, and what the ancient philosophers were looking for all the time, was how to keep society in tune with nature and make it last as long as possible, and humanize every stage in it. Because we know that what happens is that from simple times, society gets more and more elaborate and more artificial and more tyrannical and more denying human nature until eventually it's destroyed or collapses or reformed. And we see the succession from, say, probably by the time Stonehenge was built in about 2000 BC, probably the people who were in charge of the megaliths were operating a pretty tyrannical system. And this was a new revelation. And again, you see at the beginning of Christianity, the same thing, the rejection of old forms and the starting again and so on. You see it at the time of the Reformation from Druidism into Christianity, because originally Christianity in this country was more or less a reformation of Druidism. And it was a rejecting of the priestly tyrannies and so on, and going back to the sources of nature, the sources of spirit, in the well, rock, fountain, the lonely place by the shore, and these places which are still sanctified today. So I think that people who would have seen the future would have seen there are cycles in these things. And just like in Revelation, St. John talks of Jerusalem, a young, innocent, ideal city, which becomes Babylon, the overblown, over-elaborate city, which is then destroyed.
Yes.
If you look at, say, modern education, the way institutions of today regard the world, we see it as very narrow. We see it's based entirely upon materialistic and rationalistic conventions, which are all very well as conventions, but they don't actually respond to human nature or to our range of perceptions. And if we start looking at things in a more traditional way, we'll get a very different world picture. You see, I never really believed in the theory of evolution. I think that had a terribly bad effect. It gave people the idea that there's no such thing as human nature, that we could be adapted to any system they like to impose upon us or with the circumstances